What a pleasure to introduce Francine. Anyone who has spent time around her knows she's an amazing woman. I have yet to come away from any conversation with her when I didn't feel elevated. She's a woman who knows exactly who she is and exactly where she came from. In one of her poems, she says, "I'm pollen blown off the backs of butterflies in Detroit," an apt description of a writer who is at once fierce, yet is totally vulnerable to the world she navigates. Her poems are made of the music of language, but they are far more than mere sound poems. They are filled with sonic bursts of energy that lead us into deeper meaning and an understanding of our own humanity. Sometimes rereading them this week, I felt like I was listening to sermons delivered up by this remarkable woman who knows the grit of the road and the soft touch of the flower in the drainage ditch. In the lovely poem Sift, she writes, "This is just a bone song, but I'm here to tell you that all of her poems feel like bone songs to me. They are poems written by a woman of magnitude. Francine has horsepower. She has juice, or mojo, whatever you want to call it. Her poems come from what I call hard learning, rising up from place, that wild and beautiful throbbing center of Detroit, and then they find you and they stick you right where you sit. There is swagger in them and there is confession, and you will find brutal honesty and exquisite tenderness, all of which causes you to have your heart broken over and over, yet wanting it to happen again and again. I love being around Francine and thank her for the generosity of her spirit. I thank her for her devotion to teaching and for coming way up here to the cold north, even if she didn't have the right pair of boots to handle the 200 inches of snow coming our way. If you get a chance to meet her after the reading, look in her eyes. I think it was Emerson who said that the eyes are the headlights of the soul. And if that's true, you'll see a wild heart, a spirit that rides directly out of the pure desire to say it true. She sits you down and makes you listen, and all you want to do is tell her not to stop. Please welcome Francine Harris.
Oh my God. Thank you, Michael, for making me cry. And thanks to the National Writers Series for having me as part of this evening. I have 4 poems. The first is the first of a series I've been working on for a while now about my mom. It's not a poem I would normally read, but reading Chasing Utopia has me thinking about the personal language we use around family. So this is an attempt at a formal hustle to open that series, and it's written in my mother's voice. Dirty White Girl Story number 1, Mary Grace. At Cooley, I fenced boys and foiled strong moves with grace. The girls could fly but never knew how to lose with grace. And I was a tough girl, fought bruised and sword sore, dueled how we sparred under stars, took a cruise with grace. The schoolers couldn't stop me sacking prom queens, showed those reddened lips like me how we could ruse with grace. Back then I was tree-bound, a misfit good girl. In poodle skirts our hopes for girl blazed and fused with grace. I learned how to hold the liquor, not my tongue. Never ingenue, but took their sultry clues as grace. Then a sailor, and oh, he liked how I raised hell. Kicked up a storm wild enough to make us fools in grace. We married by an airport, roared with the planes, let him settle me with kids to raise and prove my grace. I spent my life kicking, never could sit still. When the cops came, I kicked them square in their blues for grace. Now rough shadows make the street corners cruel. No one spells my name strong, they don't like to use the grace. There's a girl in the attic who knows my name. When records skip, her voice cracks and slews to Mary Grace. When the sea says horses, it says horses, oh, I make horses. And I should say that this is also a persona poem. It's written in the voice of the sea. I wrote it shortly after the BP oil spill. The epigraph: she had horses who threw rocks at glass houses, Joy Harjo. When the sea says horses, it says, horses? Oh, I make horses. I make horses out of flotsam and horses of oily condoms and horses of engine spatter. So horses mostly nasty, horses all confused, dizzy, spinning, imperiled carousel horses, unpainted, untagged horses, horses no one can use. I make warped horses and hobby horses, missing little horse handles. I make a good shoe horse, a fine, wobbling, drunken horse, but mostly horses with no hooves and horses too heavy to move. I used to make horses that could spit, horses that could buck, but oh, now I make thin horses, gaunt and worn horses, horses full of silt and gill, ground up dusty sand horses, awash in empty saloon horses. I make horses too frail to stand upright and horses stuck inside horses. I make machines of horse and horse of brine and horse necks and missing hides. I make headless horses, tailless horses with no limbs to kick and comb. Horses? Oh, I make horses that fit into skulls of other horses, horses who can't lead blind horses. I make horses out of dreams, and horses I make horse without a rider, with no one snug inside the dimple of her back. She clomps off into ossuaries among all the horse hiss heads and horse haints. She's a banshee horse who neighs at tide, a heavy, heaving horse torso who stomps and drags and tangles the shore among the distended torsos of birds. I have a couple from the book. One is called Would Like to First Thank God. Okay, those are gone. Would like to first thank God. As if God wanted to be thanked, like God cared about thank you, like God didn't have a whole warehouse of thank yous God could pick up out of God's make me a thank you box whenever God wanted. As if God cared about your folded hands. God made those hands. God could make those hands fold up. Like God got you your contract, like God didn't have better things to do. God isn't, after all, the one who raised you, staying up nights, waiting to see if you get in before 2. The clock ticks and God is trying to decide whether or not to have the next hurricane, the way one may decide whether or not to have the soup. You must think God is codependent. God can take care of God's self. God has one foot out the door already because God is sick of your shit, I'll tell you what. Like God was sitting in the audience wearing God's sexiest dress that God bought just for this night, just because things have been tense between you and because God wanted you to know you're still the one God's always waiting for to come home with flowers and say, I'm sorry every once in a while, it wouldn't kill you. But tonight, God will take you standing up there on the mic thanking God before you thank your producers and give shout-outs in code. Side projects. God understands. God's not jealous. God is just happy you remembered that you'd like to thank God. God's blushing now. So this last poem I'll leave you with. It's a little bit longer. I wrote it actually, and I'm still writing it. The first time I visited Traverse City a couple years ago, I think I had a premonition that I might move here. So it actually is set in Horizon Books in their pretty awesome poetry section. It's called Choosing Poets Out of Town Like Choosing a Date. And there's an epigraph from a friend's band. Never use love in a song, but never as long, and always just as wrong. Pure Horsehair. Number 1 reminds you of staring at video boxes and dreaming in New York. How you pack up all your black and white photographs and move to New York. Chop off all your hair instead of getting some dumb tattoo. His face is quarter cropped in the camera box, and you can imagine drinking with him by a dumpster. In the second poem, he mentions rats, and you think of the rats whose glare you tried to return in the subway, how it was like they were waiting for something. He's good at these words, and they look like sticky stars on the tops of New York skyscrapers. He is as wiry as the nervous boy who sat next to you for both semesters of Shakespeare, but it is like he is waiting for you to fall off the platform. No one makes such pretty discoveries this consistently. The you who would buy this book really wants to be lied to. Number 2 takes on rebellion, but renders it in the colors and 10 tunes of a circus. Corners. With her, you would take on new limbs. She reminds you of boys who never told you their secrets, but who would wear your eyeliner in public on a dare. You probably share the same myopia, but she is adjusted to the strain. You might both breathe hard at the same altitude in the northwest, but in the misty mountain range, she knows how to swerve a squirrel on a winding road. She has a billy tuft of hair under her lip. It all seems metaphysical. She graffiti sketches flower bombs on warehouse walls and rides the ferry to Bainbridge to twirl fire with her friends on their organic farms. You'd buy her for the same reason you started hiking, for fear of the dirt. She might make your body wilt the right way, but she's also too good at making things. You'd both supine mumble at each other. There's a natural oat to her fingertips. She says, "Tell me," and doesn't mean it. It's your job to say it just right, so you leave the wild wheat in her eyes. But number 3? Well, number 3 lives in Alaska. His picture makes you sad. He reminds you of the men you shot pool with in Phoenix, who rented rooms by the week, who only stopped smiling long enough to get down a shot, who tried hard not to mention their ex-wives, who tucked in their black rock band t-shirts, whom you didn't date and who didn't ask. In their motel rooms, legal papers littered their shelves propped up by cinder blocks. You could always smoke in their rooms. His name is Joseph. His hair is parted asymmetrically, which seems to have something to do with what you've already lost and what you think you'll never find again. Of lake towns, like this one, where women's bellies emerge and slip out from under not-so-feminine khaki, of women who barely flick an eye over their Velcro dress straps, this one walks the cold beach, but the fugue is soft. Joseph, the babies his book wants to seep from young girls in their pine-tall stances. The men, expectant warriors, who hold up their women in line for coffee. The perfume of wide-band miniskirts washed down the sandstone wall. Joseph, lay back Alaska, run through its strong bays. The couples here bow to the weather. In summer, they share gelato from a green cup, but in winter, they will sip ice from one another's teeth. Someday, visit yourself here with me in our new town. The cold doesn't seem to bother you, so I think we could love anything. The setting sun will cut up these women's mouths, and then we can set it all out to freeze. We could carry our guns together. We would stink of the smoke from burning the weekly trash. Our bodies would grow hair underwater, and the contrast would curl into seaweed and sharks, which you would skin, and lay the bones into flaccid bells. Clink, to Alaska missing its scales. Before skin could smoke, he might find a wolf under my knees, and I might be wearing his pants. Memories would ellipse and slap at our eyelids. We would snore and tell no one to tell. Joseph with the piercing Alaska yes. Our feet are turning white. Thank you.